Today, we have come to acquire a strawberry pendant. This pendant as a whole is made up of a date-shaped needle. The wire used to be made of 5-grain milk cotton. A double-strand hook loom. The crochet is used for the 3.5mm crochet. And the next we start to hook up the hook. First on the fingers, around the 2 circles. It's probably the width of the 2 fingers. Take the needle ring off the back of it. The crochet needle penetrates into the needle ring to bring out a coil. Then go on the hook for 2 standing notches. Then the crochet wire wound up, and crochet in the starting ring. A mid-length needle coil that is not finished. We're going to have to pull a little longer. Probably the same height as the 2 standing needles. Then the crochet wound to continue the hook in the starting ring. The weave out of the 4 and 4. The mid-length needle that is not finished. Plus the one that starts with the most of it. A total of 5 unaccomplished mid-length needles have been hooked. And then the crochet wire wound up. A disposable pull over all the coils on the crochet hook. Hook up a braid needle for a little more than a braid. That way, we hooked up with a date-shaped pin. And then we hook up the needle to the wire. Next follow the same method in the starting ring. I continued to hook 3 groups of 5 that were undone. Styling for the composition of the medium-long needle. The first lap we had in total was hooked up to 4 groups of date-shaped needles. And then deal with the part of the opening. We pull the line in the inside first. Pull the line on the outside of the line again. In this way the needle ring is narrowed down. Finally we in the first needle hooked up with a drawing pin. The end of the pull-out position is in our first date-shaped pin. In the midst of the needle mesh corresponding to the above. The crochet is in the middle of the first needle. Hook up the hook for a pull-out pin. The coil tightens some of the. Let's take a look at our second lap. It's the need to hook up the middle between our 2 date-shaped needles. Inside this large gap, the inside of the. Next we need to transition the position of the pull-out. In the gap between the 2 date-shaped needles. Wear it in. Bring out one of the coils. Direct closer to the more than 1 coils in the loop. Weave a needle in a drawing of a needle. Then go on the hook for 2 standing notches. And then the crochet wire wound up. Inside the large gap between every 2 date-shaped needles. Each hook is woven out of 2 date-shaped needles. The first date-shaped needle hook is well knit. We're still wearing it in this hole in the hole. The hook is then hooked up to a date-shaped needle. A hole in a hole, that hooks up 2 date-shaped needles. So that's the plus of a date-shaped needle. And then each hook in the remaining needle mesh with a date-shaped needle plus needle. The second lap is a total of 4 groups. 4 groups of date-shaped needle plus needles. What about after we hooked up to the end? The pin corresponding above the first date-shaped needle. The eye is hooked up to the end of a drawing pin. Then transition to the gap between the 2 pinpoints in the front. Hook up the hook for a tug of war. Go on to the next 2 braid needles. Start the hook for a third lap. First of all, in the first of the first pinches, hook up with a needle for a date-shaped needle. In the first gap it is necessary to hook up 2 date-shaped needles. After 2 date-shaped needle hooks are well knit, we come to a gap in the front of the road. What about hooking up a date-shaped needle in this gap? A dosing needle for a date-shaped needle. A date-shaped needle is a group of, and then we continue to hook up 3 groups according to this pattern. Add the needle in accordance with a date-shaped needle. What about after a date-shaped needle hooked up to 4 groups? We're at the top of the first date-shaped needle. The needle is hooked up to a pull-out pin in the eye. Then take the line transition to the front 2 dates. In the midst of a large gap between the shaped needles, constitutes a drawing of a needle in the form of A. Then go on the hook for 2 standing arches. The 4th circle we are in each of the gaps. Hook up the hook for a date-shaped needle. A total of date-shaped needles were acquired. What about after the date-shaped needle hooks are finished? We in the first needle hooked up with a drawing pin. And then hook up with a standing ovation. Then go on the hook for the 5th lap. In the midst of the needles corresponding to each of the date-shaped needles. Tell a short needle about a short shot. The gap is out of the hook and not hooked. Come to the next date-shaped needle. The needle mesh corresponding to the eye of the needle. Hook up the hook for a short pin. There's not enough to skip the gap. We only hooked up when we hooked up. The corresponding needle item corresponding to the upper part of the date-shaped needle. A total of a dozen short needles are hooked up. After a dozen short needle hooks are finished, we in the first needle hooked up with a drawing pin. Plug in the right amount of cotton in the plant. The 6th lap we are the one that crochet 6 short needles. The crochet thread runs through the middle of the first needle. Bring out one of the coils. Then it goes through the 2nd needle in the eye. Bring out one of the coils. The hook for the crochet wire. The 3 coils on the hook needle are towed once and for all. So it's a pin down for a short pin. We follow this method in accordance with a reduced pin for a total of 4 sets of short needles. Then, with the first needle, a draw-out pin. Hook up the hook for a standing ovation. The end of the break. Pull the line head out of the line. Stitch the needle with a hand stitch, threading along the outer braid of each needle mesh. The tightening of the coil. Get a tie to each other. Cut the spare. The next acquisition of the leaf part will be: start by beading the 2 rings on the fingers. Then the crochet is inserted inside the needle ring. Hook up with 2 standing notch needles. Then crochet out of a dozen long needles in a needle ring. What about after the date-shaped needle hooks are finished? We have shrunk the starting of the needle ring. Then the crochet is worn back inside the needle ring. And the first needle to hook up with a drawing pin. The next acquisition of the strawberry leaf part is hooked up to 5 braid needles by the hook. 123 and 45. Then go back to the penultimate and the second one. Pick up the outer half of the needle, threading the needle outward from the center of the small braid. A short pin is hooked on the outside of the woven strip. The second needle is hooked up to a mid-length pin. The third one is hooked up to a mid-length pin. The fourth needle is hooked up to a long pin. Then go ahead and skip a shot. Do not hook up the needle to the inside of the third pin. It's good enough to have a strawberry leaf. Next we continue to follow the same approach. The acquisition of 5 pieces of strawberry leaves. After the 6-piece leaves have been acquired, well, we do a drawing pin with the first needle. And then hook up with a standing ovation. The end of the break. The next hook for the strawberry. First of all, hit a living knot on the finger. The crochet needle penetrates into the starting ring of the needle. Hook for a crochet of braid needles. From the central hole eye of the strawberry land, take the 2 ends of the hanging rope. The hook goes in. It kills the knot. Fix the line head for a little bit with the stitches. The strawberry ground is sewn on the strawberry, or it's okay to stick with glue all the time.